Hello, viewers. Welcome back to Mac Truck Book Stop. I am going to talk today about Gabriel Garcia Marquez of Love and Other Demons. He is a Colombian author. Um, it was written later in his career, in 1994, I believe. And um, while Gabriel Garcia Marquez is probably Colombia's most well-known author, most well known for his book 100 Years of Solitude, which was published in the 60s, I believe. Yes, this came later in his career and is actually a much shorter novel at a slim 169 pages in my Spanish edition here. I read it in Spanish because, if I'm fluent in Spanish, I might as well try to read them in their original language. And but you can find it in English as well, called Of Love and Other Demons in Spanish. It's Del Amor y Otros Demonios. And I was talking about Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He's kind of, a lot of people would call him the originator of magical realism, particularly Latin American magical realism, which is probably Latin America's, the most well-known um, literature current worldwide to come out of Latin America. And I guess you wouldn't say he's the originator, but he certainly popularized it. You might say the originator is Juan Rulfo, if you go back to Pedro Paramo, which is another book that I'm looking to read for Mexico, although I'm not sure when. I'll get to that one. Um, but regardless, this book is pretty readable, pretty accessible. It's, you don't need a whole lot of historical context to really get into it. I mean, I think if you just know the basics of like Spanish colonization of South America, this takes place in colonial Cartagena in Colombia, which is on the Caribbean coast, and was kind of the point of entry and leaving for all goods flowing into and out of the Spanish Empire of South America. And the book starts out right away presenting one of these goods horrifically being, um, African men and women as slaves. And that is right front and center as you get into it, this being colonial times in the Spanish Empire. And uh, so you have slavery as a topic here. You also have um, the Catholic Church, the influence of the Catholic Church, and the influence of the Spanish crown being major players in this story. But it all centers around a girl named Sierra Maria who's bitten by a dog, and it's a rabid. They find out it's a rabid dog, so it's believed that she also has rabies. Um, Sierra Maria, she is the daughter of the Marquis or Marquez of the town of Cartagena. So she's a big deal. She's from a family that basically runs the town, and um, the family has to figure out how to deal with sort of this issue of their daughter possibly having rabies and the scandal that causes the family. And it all kind of gets contorted and twisted into Sierra Maria possibly being having a demon inside her, and then about halfway through the novel, or a little before, she is interned into a convent, Santa Clara, and basically um, forced to undergo exorcism because they believe she has a demon inside her, and it all originated with her just this, possibly having rabies, and it kind of gets blown out of proportion. That's about as far as I can go into the story without giving spoilers. One more thing I can say is there is a priest that is assigned to her to carry out her exorcism, and he is kind of the other main character, so to speak, and an important character as well. Um, all of this was inspired, actually, and this is in the introduction of the story. Gabriel Garcia Marquez was working as a journalist, um, and was sent to Cartagena on an assignment because they were building a shopping center or mall um, on top of this old crumbling convent, Santa Clara, the same one in the book. And they were basically pulling out all the skeletons underneath it because, and I've seen this in Lima with the monasteries and convents. There's pretty much dead people underneath all these convents. Skeletons, convents and monasteries. There's all these skeletons and tombs and stuff, and they got to pull all that stuff out to be preserved or put in museum or historical archives or whatever they do with them. I have no idea, but regardless, Gabriel Garcia Marquez was sent there to basically observe and see what was there to be found. And there was a viceroy there that they pulled out. There is the abbot and or the bishop and his secret lover, and and then finally there was this young girl who has the flowing copper hair that reached all across the floor and everywhere. And somebody in the convent told him, yeah, the human hair can grow a few centimeters per year, however long. And he calculates by this that this was 200 years ago. And so he's thinking, I guess this is what, this reminded him of a story that his grandmother told him when he was younger about a girl with very long copper hair that worked miracles. People thought she was a saint, but she died of being bitten by a rabid dog and got rabies. And so this is, I guess, what inspired the whole story, even though it doesn't follow that idea exactly. So, that, I guess, is the setup of the story. Bigger concept, it's told in a third person. We jump between the main characters. All of the characters are fleshed out in this third person narrative style, overarching. Some of it is a bit like exposition, like the Márquez, like the father of Sierva Maria. This 12-year-old girl with the long copper hair, her father is basically, there's a section where it just talks about his whole history of him, but he was a really engaging character, a really interesting character in the novel. All the characters are actually really deep and really interesting. And as I said, even though this is a short book, it's very dense, like symbolically dense and emotionally dense. The characters are dense. The one thing I will say, there is some uncomfortable stuff regarding the Catholic Church, if that's something that bothers you about the book, but I'll get into it later. That's probably not as bad as it sounds, honestly, but it's an important part of the book and where it goes. Um, Again, I don't want to spoil that, actually. Even though, unfortunately, don't do this, but if you want to read the book, but a quick read on Wikipedia will spoil a major element of the book. Um, Even just the basic summary of the plot. So that's the bad thing about Wikipedia, which I mentioned in the last video because it was mentioned in the book. Even though it's mankind's most honest project, it will spoil books for you. So anyway, the major themes of the book, obviously, from what I've talked about, are the exploitation of colonization, Colombia's mixed identity of, you have indigenous people, African heritage, European heritage. You have Europeans that were born there called criollos. you have Europeans that were born over there but came over here. Um, you have the way that the Catholic Church keeps society a bit from progressing in some ways. Like, there is a doctor in the novel who's probably what I think my favorite character, or the most interesting, well, no, not the most interesting, but probably the one that I think is like the most level-headed of everybody, or the smartest. You know, he's a doctor, a Jewish doctor, and he basically sees things as they are, in the sense where he says Sierva Maria, she might get rabies, she might not. She was bitten by a rabid dog, but yeah, on the ankle, so it might get to her head and it might not. And if it doesn't, there's nothing to worry about. And when all this talk about her possibly being possessed by a demon comes up, he's kind of like, well, yeah, obviously that's false. Um, but yeah, so you have that as an element, but yeah, there's a real central. I mean, there's also some really deep symbolism in this book that I haven't quite grasped yet, but it did, and I would need to do a deep read of this book and really think about it and listen to more and read up on more analysis. But uh, for now, it didn't interfere with me enjoying the story because this is just an emotionally powerful and good story, and definitely reaches the level of myth. It's like reading about, it's kind of a twisted story of sainthood in a way. It's kind of weird, but that everyone thinks that the saint is actually possessed by a devil. Yeah, and I think the way it all comes together and how certain details get twisted like that, how the church at times is shown to be demonic, how those who are supposed to be possessed by demons are shown to be angelic in certain lights, um, is quite fascinating. And yeah, even though, like I said, there is some uncomfortable stuff in the book, I felt like it only added to the story instead of detracting. And the characters respond, the characters interact in ways that there's tension between all of them. There's tension between all of the characters' relationships, um, and the tone of the narrator is just so, the writing is like very lyrical, especially in Spanish. I don't know if that's because I read it in Spanish, the original language, but if you can, I actually think this is a great book even to like learn some Spanish from, because like it's not that long, and you can do what I do, and if there's a word you don't understand, use the Google Translate app and um, you know hover over. You can it actually has an image feature, so you can like translate it with your phone. That's what I did in some parts. I didn't need to do it often, but it's very helpful for learning Spanish in that way too, being a shorter book. I do plan to read more of Gabriel Garcia Marquez for sure. I'm kind of making a note of authors and countries that after I get through all the countries that I want to, or all the countries, period, I'm not sure yet. There are certain countries and certain authors where it's like, I really want to delve into this literature more and read like the classic stuff, or the stuff that really grips me, and read deep instead of wide at some point. At some point, I don't need to keep reading wide, especially after I finished a project reading the entire world or most of it. So, anyway, I'm digressing. Yeah, I've talked about, I guess, everything I can non-spoilery. This book is a pretty interesting way to get into magical realism. I don't know if this is the book that would be a best first um, foray into the genre. I haven't read enough of it to know if this is the one that I would recommend, but I loved it, frankly. I could easily read through it again, and it would probably take me one day or less. But to really deeply get into the themes of this novel, I have to read it again. I'll try to talk a little bit now in the spoiler section. So, if you want to read it, go away, and politely, and buy the book, or get it from the library, and let me know what you think. So yeah, I'll talk about some of the other themes now. Ready? We good? Okay. So I gotta first talk about. I got up to the point where Sierva Maria is interned in the convent and assigned a priest to her. She's 12 years old, and she's assigned a 36-year-old priest. And I'm pointing out the age difference for a reason because I'm getting to what is the most uncomfortable thing about the novel, which is the fact that this priest and the girl actually start to fall in love. Yeah, there's there's no consummation, physical consummation besides I think like a kiss or something like that, but that was the hardest thing in the book for me to wrap my head around and get over and find figure out where that fit in because the father de Laura is um a character that I could feel a lot of compassion for. Like before he got to the point where he confessed his love to this 12-year-old girl with long hair who's being treated for exorcism unjustly and being mistreated the in the this convent by this kind of wicked uh, nun who runs the monastery. Abesa. I don't know exactly how that translates in English from reading this in Spanish, but um, that's obviously the central relationship in the novel, and um, I think that this kind of love between them is like it's it's bordering. It's not platonic. Like it definitely goes farther than platonic with them like lying together, talking about wanting to run away together, and the father trying to justify how they could get married. Um, but there's a lot of other stuff going on around this. Um, bef- the father goes and talks to the girls, or Father de Laura goes and talks to the girl's father, the Marquez, or a Marquis. And I mentioned before how interesting his character is because we get all of his backstory, how he was in love with kind of a woman from a lower station earlier in life, but because his parents pressured him out of it, he married another woman who died young, and then he married another woman after that who basically just seduced him and used him to because she wanted his money and station, and it was a move up in life for her because she was a mestizo girl and he was a European man, so she was mixed indigenous blood, and he's pretty much no, not European but Criollo, so like European blood but born in America or whatever. So she basically just married him for money and power. She has all these affairs with the African slaves behind his back, and these African slaves are actually very important characters in the novel as far as bringing up Sierva Maria. And this is something really important to talk about. That Sierva Maria is the portrait symbolically of innocence in the story. She is the blank slate on which all of what Cartagena or colonial Colombia here in Cartagena is. And so um, these um, these African women and men around her basically, I hate just calling them slaves because they bring her up in different cultures with she can speak three different African languages thanks to all of them. They give her necklaces and jewelry that she wears. So she's like, um, culturally, she is more African than she is Criollo because her parents basically just ignore her. The Marquis ignores her because his wife, who's just using him for money and influence, she hates her own daughter and makes her go and live with the slave. She's like, it's either me or her. She can't live in this house. She's got to stay with the slaves. Like totally mistreated. And so when she's bit by rabies, the Marquis does love his daughter. He's just a man who doesn't have convictions to follow what he wants. He's easily swayed by others. Basically, he's weak spirited, and you can feel for him because I think all many of us in our life have found ourselves in situations where we are swayed by others. We choose a path because of what others want, not what we want. And he just does this his whole life until now he's in a situation where he can't even love or protect his own daughter because others are using him. His wife is using him, and her father as well. And that's why I feel there's so many characters in this novel that you can feel compassion for, and they almost all meet tragic ends. The main ones, anyway. I mentioned Abre Nuncio, the doctor, who sees Sierva Maria early in the novel and rationally explains what rabies is about. Father de Laura, the one who falls in love with Sierva Maria in the convent, being in charge of her exorcism, he goes to Abre Nuncio and starts to confide in Abre Nuncio. Abre Nuncio actually has a book in his library that Father de Laura read when he first became a priest or something like that, and they confiscated it from him because it was an illegal book, a banned book basically. And so Abre Nuncio represents kind of this outside world that Father de Laura longs for. There's another scene where Father de Laura and the bishop um, of Cartagena, or this area, whatever, they are they watch an eclipse together, a solar eclipse. I feel like that has to be symbolic of something because later, later, uh, Father de Laura is stuck with like the eclipse um, kind of imposed on one of his eyes because he only watches it with one of his eyes. So he's walking around with like the eclipse still in like eye damage from the eclipse basically. Even though they say it goes away after a while, and then Abre Nuncio gives him some eye drops to cure it. And I almost wonder if the eclipse is like somehow symbolic of the change in him where he realized, where the demon of love possesses him. Because the name of the book, Of Love and Other Demons, is quite significant. I think that love is only one of the many demons in this book. The irrationality of the Catholic Church is another, that time and time again in this book, you think that they're finally going to start believing that Sierva Maria isn't possessed. Like, they got over the fact that she has rabies. She's not going to get rabies. But now they all think she's possessed. And as she's in this convent and she's being mistreated by all the nuns, and she's being forced to do all these exorcism things, and she has this, father who's confusing her with, who's supposed to be in charge of her exorcism, who's probably confusing her by saying that he loves her. And I mean, and Abre Nuncio late in the book even calls Father de Laura on this, which I thought was great, and says like, when did you lose your mind? Like, you are kind of being an abuser toward this, girl. Like, everyone's, and by this time the word's gotten around like the town that this girl is being abused by her exorcist. And Father de Laura, even though at this point you followed his character and you're compassionate for him, if at that point you haven't been questioning what he's doing, Abre Nuncio, the voice of reason, the Jewish doctor, throws it in your face as the reader, and this is almost right before the book ends. That being said, Father de Laura does try to run away with, or he wants to run away with her, but and Sierva Maria desperately wants to escape, but the bishop actually finds Father de Laura whipping himself for his thoughts about Sierva Maria, and at that point he tries to separate them. So once they're trying, once Father de Laura is like separated officially from Sierva Maria, he finds a tunnel into the monastery. And there's two other characters that end up getting linked to this tunnel, and one being the reason it's closed. She is a nun who's locked away for killing two other nuns for a strange motive. Actually, no, she's the only character that's related to this tunnel. But she uses that tunnel to escape at the end of the novel, which then they seal up so that Father de Laura can no longer secretly see Sierva Maria. And at this point, Sierva Maria is in love with him too, and she has no idea. She never has any idea why this father can never come back to see her. And it's like this love between them only did her more damage because she ends up dying um, of a broken heart. Essentially, is the only explanation we get at the end of the novel. But I think it's really because she's just been through too much. All these exorcisms. It could have been because of rabies. We don't really know. A lot in this book is ambiguous, but everything is interconnected. And that nun, I can't remember her name off the top of my head. I gotta get her name. I can't just say that nun who's in ex nun who's in jail. Martina Laborde is such an interesting character because, yeah, she killed two nuns in the monastery with no motive, yet she becomes Sierva Maria's best friend while in prison, and then escapes and leaves her a note and says, "Never forget me," to Sierva Maria on this note. Or no, I think she said that to her before leaving. Regardless, I'm just in my head. I'm drawing all these connections between all the characters, and then there's all these moments that you think that Sierva Maria is gonna get out, and then there's this one moment when this random guy shows up because the bishop who has asthma, after Father Delora is taken out, um, for falling in love with the girl, he's taken out as her exorcist. The bishop tries to take over as her exorcist, but then his asthma attacks keep him from doing it. The bishop suffers from asthma. Then another guy shows up from Europe, from Spain, but he's somebody who grew up among slaves as well, like Sierva Maria, so can relate to her. And you think, here's her savior. And then he turns up dead, floating in a well, and no one ever knows who did it. It remains a mystery forever. I want to reread this and try to figure out just who killed this guy who came in and seemed like such a badass, and then he is like just dead. He was supposed to be the salvation, but then he's just dead. And somebody killed him. Was it like the bishop who pulled the strings because he wants Sierva Maria to stay in the abbey, or the nun abbess who is the head of this convent? Um, I don't know. I don't know, and it's left ambiguous and a mystery on purpose. This book really puts the magic in magical realism. Like that's cheesy, but the point is, while there is realism, it's like it really feels like this just twisted fairy tale or something, and um, taking place in Cartagena, and I've been to Cartagena in the past couple of years, and I had a really great idea of what it's like. The castle is still standing in Cartagena. The walls, the ramparts of the city are still standing. You really get a good sense of what the city looked like back then if you just take out the high skyscrapers and stuff, the high rise buildings. um, you can definitely put yourself there, and it's this tropical Caribbean um, place, on the north coast of Colombia. But to have all this kind of like darkness and wretchedness going on against the descriptions of like the ocean and the beautiful vegetation and stuff is such a uh, juxtaposition that I can really get into, I guess, because I've been there. I don't know if other people would feel that as much from the writing, because I don't feel like there were a lot of like landscape descriptions per se, or like descriptions of the city so much. But the descriptions of the convent, I really remember. Like, one of the most memorable moments of the book for me was when they bring Sierva Maria to the convent. The Marquis brings Sierva Maria to the convent to intern her, talking to the bishop for the first time, who has asthma, and these green eyes that later are described as like demonic, ironically, while he is trying to exorcise Sierva Maria. Sierva Maria, as she's being exorcised, describes those who are, the bishop and the nuns as demonic. The nuns try to steal her necklaces, and one of them falls and breaks her skull basically, and so they return the necklaces because they think that's the devil. All these bad things happen, and they blame it all on Sierva Maria and her being possessed, while really they are the ones being demonic. And so obviously I think there's a huge criticism of religion coming from this book, and superstitious religion at that. Um, and all very valid, especially in this context of colonial Cartagena. And really, the only voice of reason, Abranuncio, if he has a weakness, it's that he is complicit in the sense that he's just taking care of himself. He doesn't particularly seem to care that much about Sierva Maria or anybody else. He's ultra pragmatic. So you don't really have any character that serves as the bridge between the totally irrational workings of religion, the innocence of Sierva Maria, the I guess the madness of Sierva Maria's parents, and then the level-headedness and reason of Abranuncio. The only bridge is the narrator, and the narrator, as omniscient as it is, cannot take action or chooses not to. So that is where I'm gonna stop my analysis for now. Yeah, I don't think I realized how moving this book was to me until I just started talking about it and got so passionate about it. It's a hard book to talk about, even though it's short. It's so dense, so symbolically, and so emotionally dense, and all of the characters are amazingly written. This is obviously a work of an author that's been doing it a long time and knows what they're doing. Like, holy crap. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, I will read more of him, and I can't, knowing that his obra maestra, his masterwork, was made almost 30 years before this one, if I'm not mistaken. Um, yeah, that's pretty incredible. Um, Sometimes I think it takes more talent to write a shorter work of fiction than a longer one. That's kind of what this book got me thinking about. To write something this mythic, or like I said, twisted tale of sainthood. To write something like that, in some ways, is more to write it powerfully and meaningfully is more difficult than, say, a 400-page novel that encompasses the entire history of a country. Um, I don't know, something to think about. They're both pretty difficult. I couldn't probably do either one of them. So, but yeah, that's all I've got. That's all I've got. I'm gonna announce the next book, which is going to be. Actually, I want to say before I announce it that the next few books are going to be interesting. The ones that I have planned to read, because like they're all from like 2022. So there's going to be a string of like recently published books coming up, but they're from all over the world, and I'm excited about reading every single one of them. But then after those, we'll again be dipping back in time. But the next one is going to be from Zimbabwe, which is Glory by No Violets Bulawayo, I think. I'm so sorry if for some reason she ever watches this. But yeah, so Glory is actually like I guess the way you could describe it is like an animal farm of modern Zimbabwe or something like that. You know, it's a all the characters are animals, that kind of thing, and it takes, I guess, some heavy influence from Animal Farm. But we should also remember that Africa has a long history of animal parables. Zimbabwe, of course, too. So maybe it's not as derivative of Animal Farm, but I thought it sounded really interesting, so I'm excited to read it. So, with that, thank you for watching, and check out Glory if you want to be ready for all of the next video. So I do hope somebody reads this of Love and Other Demons. It was actually recommended to me by my wife, and she read it some time ago and really thought I'd like it. She loved it. And yeah, I wasn't disappointed, even though I was skeptical at first. So, yeah, thanks for watching. Take care.